Prince Murat sent them an officer of his staff, Monsieur Bailly de Montillon, to reassure them, and to suggest to them that they should protest against the violence which had been offered to them, a proposal to which they lent a willing ear. On March 21st, 2 days after his abdication, Charles IV signed this protestation and sent it to the Grand Duke of Berg, Murat. Murat sent it on to the emperor, who approved of what he had done. Several orders, coming one after the other, had enjoined on Murat to push forward with all speed to Madrid. Napoleon's brother-in-law, in consequence, made his entry into the Spanish capital on the 24th, at the head of a part of his army. On the following day, Prince Ferdinand, who had left Aranjuez in a hurry, made haste to make a solemn entry into Madrid, as though to take possession of the rights conferred upon him by his adoption of the popular party. He was on horseback, surrounded by his officers, and was enthusiastically received. The diplomatic corps came to present their respects to the new king. The ambassador of France stayed away, Murat having declared to Ferdinand that he could not acknowledge him as king, as he had received no instructions concerning him from the emperor. As soon as Napoleon was apprised of these facts, he decided that the time for action had come. In various conferences which he had with Messieurs de Talleyrand and Champagny, the Spanish question, once more brought under discussion, came up. Various opinions were pronounced in the course of these conversations on the alternatives of changing the Spanish dynasty or maintaining it in power after taking guarantees for the future. At the last conference, which was held on the eve of his departure, Napoleon did not express his own opinion on the matter because his mind was not yet made up as to what line of action he should adopt, and because he wished to see with his own eyes. He appeared, in the course of these conversations, to be in quest of either strong objections or of good reasons for strengthening him in the resolution to which he himself inclined. At the same time, nothing was decided upon at this meeting, and the emperor left Paris without having expressed any fixed determination. Before leaving Paris, the emperor had written to his brother, the King of Holland, Louis, to the effect that in case he should decide to change the Spanish dynasty, he had thought of him for the throne of Spain, that this was only a project, but that it was possible, circumstances aiding, that all would be ready in a fortnight, and asked him for a straightforward answer to this question: if I should create you King of Spain, would you accept the throne? He added that he expected an answer of yes or no, that nobody could be taken into his confidence, as the thing ought to be done before it had been thought over, etc. Louis had refused, and Napoleon answered him that in consequence the matter could no longer be considered. The emperor arrived at Bayonne on April 14th, after having spent a week at Bordeaux, where his stay was not without profit to the commercial interests of this city. He spent 2 days at Bayonne, waiting that the Chateau de Mirac, distant at about a league from Bayonne, which he had purchased, should be in a state to receive him and the Empress Josephine, who was to meet him there. The mission of General Savary, in whom Napoleon had every confidence, was to see the French ambassador to find out all that had happened at Madrid and Aranjuez, to assure himself of the real state of affairs, to see whether King Charles's abdication was genuine, and to ascertain what sort of a man the Prince of the Asturias was, and what degree of confidence he merited. Napoleon made it clear to General Savary that if neither the father nor the son could be trusted, he should make up his mind to dethrone the reigning family. On his arrival at Madrid, General Savary sought Prince Ferdinand and his personal private counselors. He found them disposed to go to Bayonne to meet the emperor, with the idea that so marked an action would render the powerful sovereign, who held the fate of Spain in his hand, favorable towards the new king. This journey was accordingly decided upon, and General Savary accompanied the prince. On arriving at Vitoria, Ferdinand, who had expected to meet the emperor there, refused to proceed any further and declared that he would wait for news of Napoleon in that city. Savary, having in vain essayed to get the better of the Spanish prince's obstinacy, proceeded to Bayonne, where he arrived some hours before the emperor. To the searching questions put to him by Napoleon on the character and disposition of Ferdinand, The general answered by expressing his mistrust in the sincerity of the assurances which had been made to him, and declared that in his opinion the prince would be governed by ministers hostile to France. The emperor sent General Savary back on the morrow, carrying a letter in which he invited His Royal Highness, the Prince of the Asturias, to come to Bayonne, but in which he made no promises, and in no way pledged himself towards him. During Savary's absence, several Spanish persons of importance, amongst others, Urquijo, the former minister, had been to see the prince and had pointed out to him that it would be a want of dignity and of prudence on his part to cross the frontier, especially considering that the Emperor Napoleon had not acknowledged him. Ferdinand and his counselors paid no attention to this advice, and the emperor's letters having dispelled their hesitations, they decided to leave for Bayonne on the morrow. Just as Ferdinand was about to enter his carriage, a mob of armed peasants who had joined in with the people who filled the prince's house wanted to prevent his departure. The traces of the carriage were cut, and the mules were led back to the stables. The Duke de l'Infantado, throwing himself in the midst of the crowd, succeeded in calming the rioters so that the mules could be put to again, and the carriages were allowed to drive off without further hindrance. On approaching Bayonne, the prince, who was beginning to be surprised at seeing nothing of the emperor, met General Duroc, who had been sent to meet him and to compliment him on his arrival. Napoleon, on his side, hearing of Ferdinand's arrival at Bayonne, jumped on horseback and rode off to pay him a first visit. He embraced him, but only addressed him as Royal Highness. On his return to Mirac, the emperor sent a chamberlain to invite the prince and his suite to dinner at the castle. The conversations which Napoleon had with Ferdinand and the persons who had accompanied him very soon showed him the emptiness and vulgar cunning of the prince's character, the mediocrity of his advisors, and their inability to direct their master. These first discoveries were not of a nature to modify the emperor's way of thinking. His opinion, accordingly, was that the regeneration of Spain under such rulers was an impossibility, was confirmed. He was disappointed to find that there was not amongst the prince's suite a single man with whom he could speak on his political views with regard to Spain. It was to Canon Escoiquites, the most intelligent amongst them, and the advisor who was the most in the prince's confidence, that Napoleon sought fit to open his mind. He accordingly told this priest that the assistance of Spain was indispensable to him to force England to peace, that the deplorable state of the Spanish monarchy was as disastrous to France as to Spain herself, that the scandal of the scenes at Escurial and at Aranjuez had shown to what degree the dynasty was degenerated and degraded, and that it was quite unable to drag the monarchy up out of the slough into which it had fallen. This, too plain speaking, astounded the canon, and brought him down from the castles in the air. In answer to his plea in favor of his pupil, Napoleon made even more positive statements. Ferdinand, to whom Escoiquites reported this conversation, protested, alleged the inalienable rights of his family, maintained that he was the legitimate king by his father's abdication, and that if Charles IV wished to withdraw his abdication, it was to him alone that he would surrender the crown. The presence of the old sovereigns being alone likely to put an end to this resistance, the emperor hurried on their arrival, as well as that of the Prince de la Paix in Bayonne. The Prince de la Paix had been treated with extreme severity. Murat was obliged to use force to tear him from the hands of those who detained him and who were firmly resolved that he should die on the scaffold. Napoleon saw Godoy on his arrival, and, disguising the disgust with which this person inspired in him, had a long conversation with him, which only gave him fresh cause for persevering in his determination to deprive Ferdinand of his crown. He undertook to assure incomes in proportion to their rank to the old king, the queen, and the Prince de la Paix. The Spanish sovereigns arrived at last on April 30th. They were received with etiquette paid to kings. The emperor went to receive them on their entry into Bayonne. The empress, who had arrived at Mirac a few days previously, went to comfort the old queen. There was hand-kissing, according to the Spanish custom. Prince Ferdinand came to bow to his father, but Charles indignantly repelled him and forbade him to follow him to his apartment. There, Their dear friend Godoy was awaiting them, and they had the pleasure of embracing him. He told them about Napoleon's plans, and they had no objections to make. They came to dinner at Mirac on the following day. The old king, weighed by his infirmities, leant on the emperor's arm as he was mounting the steps of the castle. Napoleon had said to him, "Lean on me, I have strength enough for both of us." King Charles's protestation against his abdication had been published in Madrid and was addressed to the junta formed by Ferdinand before his departure from the city, a junta presided over by his uncle Don Antonio. By the terms of this document, Charles addressed a severe letter to his son, reproaching him with his guilty conduct and summoning him to surrender the crown. Ferdinand answered that although he had received the crown by his father's voluntary abdication, he was ready to sign it on condition that the king should reign in person and that the restitution should take place openly at Madrid before the assembled Cortes. But King Charles, retracting his forced abdication, declared himself sole legitimate king of Spain and added that in view of his absence from his kingdom, he appointed the Grand Duke of Berg-Murat his lieutenant general and invested him with all his powers. At the same time, orders were given that the infant Don Antonio, the king's brother, president of the junta, the infant Don Francis de Paul, and the Queen of Etruria, who had remained in Madrid, should be sent on to Bayonne. The Spaniards, already excited by the scenes which had taken place, were greatly aroused by the departure of the members of the royal family, one after the other. Ferdinand, by means of letters and couriers who were dispatched in disguise from Bayonne, inflamed the excitement of the public and kept it aglow. These couriers were watched and arrested, and the papers found upon them were conveyed to the emperor's cabinet. These letters were filled with invectives and curses against the French and Napoleon. They contained false news, were calculated to excite the anger of the people, and represented the Prince of the Asturias as the victim of the most odious treatment. These lying stories, spread broadcast by means of bulletins and manuscript notes, were read with eagerness everywhere. So greatly did they arouse the popular mind that a general insurrection broke out in Madrid on May 2nd. Wounded French soldiers in the hospitals and soldiers and officers found alone in the streets were massacred without pity by a furious and savage mob. The emperor heard of this sad occurrence as he was returning to Mirac on horseback. The news was brought by one of the Grand Duke's staff officers, Monsieur de Hennecourt, who later on became master of the hunt. In a violent passion, the Napoleon turned his horse round without a moment's delay and galloped off to find King Charles, to whom he showed these dispatches. The king sent for the infants, and both he and the queen spoke to Ferdinand with the extremest severity. The king brandished his stick, as though about to strike his son. The queen was in such a rage that she forgot herself to the point of walking up to her son and making a gesture as though to box his ears. The prince, standing motionless and with downcast eyes, did not answer a single word. The emperor put an end to this painful scene by informing the Prince of the Asturias that he was bound only to his father, that he acknowledged Charles alone as king, and that unless Ferdinand surrendered the crown which he had usurped with all speed, he would be treated as a rebel. Charles IV cried out that he did not want a crown which was tarnished, and that he renounced a country in which an ungrateful son had roused every passion against its sovereign. Ferdinand, covered with confusion and vexation, left the room, followed by a small group of courtiers who had waited for him in the outer drawing room. After having spent a moment with the old sovereigns, Napoleon left them and returned to Mirac, lost in thought and only emerging from this state of abstraction to utter bitter reflections on the state of degradation into which this family had fallen. On the same day, documents were drawn up which settled the position of the Prince of the Asturias, at the same time as that of the infants, who were not to return to Spain. The castle of Navarre was given to Prince Ferdinand in fee simple, with an income of 1 million francs. A pension of 400,000 francs was allotted to each of the infants. The prince signed in his own name and that of his family a renunciation of the crown of Spain and all rights of succession. King Charles, refusing to accept the crown, whose sole proprietor he was acknowledged to be, he surrendered it to the emperor to dispose of as he might think fit. He received in compensation the palace and forest of Compiègne for life, and the castle of Chambord, and a fee simple, with an income of 30 million reals, 7,500,000 francs, to be paid him from the public treasury of France.